The decade was the 1870s. The place was the Arizona Territory, a land that felt less settled than temporarily stunned. It was a place of red dust and bone-white sky. The drought had lasted 3 years. The Salt River, the lifeblood of the valley, had shrunk to a cracked white scar of alkali that shimmered in the heat. Gold in the mountains and the promise of the railroad cutting through the basin were changing the rules. Old laws of thirst were being replaced by new laws of greed. The town of Salt Crossing baked. It was a collection of raw lumber buildings huddled by the dry riverbed, smelling of dust, sweat, and mule droppings. The sun did not just bake, it punished. Evelyn Hart understood the punishment. She felt it as a physical weight on her shoulders every morning when she opened her father's apothecary. At 21, she was, by the town's estimation, late to be married, late to be starting a family. But Evelyn was not measuring her life by the town's clock. She was the daughter of Dr. Hart, a quiet, meticulous man of German descent who had come west for his lungs and found only more dust to fill them. He now spent his days worrying over ledgers, his cough a dry rustle of paper. Evelyn worried about practical things. She worried about the quinine running low, about the brittle state of the herbs, about the fine red powder that coated every bottle, every mortar, every pestle. She did not worry about a husband. The men she saw in Salt Crossing measured their worth in the weight of dust in their pouches or the number of ties they laid for the railroad. They spat tobacco juice that sizzled on the boardwalks. Evelyn wanted something else. She was not even sure what it was. Not riches, just a space. A space to stand upright and breathe air that was not thick with bargain and compromise. She was intelligent, her mind shaped by her father's pharmacopoeia and her own quiet observations. She saw the town clearly. She saw the desperation growing as the wells got lower. And she saw the man who was capitalizing on it. Silas Crowther. His name was spoken in whispers, or too loudly in the saloons by men who worked for him. He had come 2 years prior with money from back east and bought the land up on the mesa. The land that held the deep springs. He said he was mining for silver, but everyone knew his true crop was water. He ran hired guns, men with cold eyes and rifles they kept too clean. He represented the New West, a place where a signature on a deed held more power than a season's crops. The conflict was as simple as it was brutal. Salt Crossing was dry. The small dine village up the canyon, which had shared the river for generations, was also dry. Crowther's mine, however, was flush. His operation diverted the deep springs, and the local marshal, a man named Brody, seemed conveniently fascinated by the shiny gold coins Crowther paid his men with. Evelyn was loading her mule one morning, the heat already a physical blow. She had a heavy delivery for the railroad work camp, 20 miles east, quinine for the fevers, laudanum for the pain, and rolls upon rolls of clean bandages. The railroad was pushing hard, and the blasting crews were careless. As she approached the sprawl of tents and raw earth that marked the camp, she saw the confrontation. She pulled her mule, Bess, to a halt behind a freight wagon, keeping her distance. The wind was high, carrying the sharp scent of creosote and the sound of voices. Silas Crowther was there, as always, looking impossibly clean. He wore a dark wool suit, a white shirt, and a string tie. He did not seem to sweat. He looked like a preacher selling damnation. He was flanked by 2 of his men. One she recognized, a heavy man named Jago, whose holster was worn low. They had a farmer cornered, Samuel Abel, a good man who worked a small homestead near the canyon mouth. Abel's face was gray with dust and despair. Crowther's voice was smooth, like oil on a hot stone. It is a simple exchange. Samuel, a barrel of water for your signature. Abel's voice was a cracked rasp. That water that is from the springs, that is our water. You fenced it. The creek is dry. Friend, Crowther said, gesturing to the landscape with an open palm, as if he were the one being wronged. My wells are not. Progress requires resources. The railroad requires my mine. The mine requires the water. He slid a piece of paper onto the wagon bed. A deed. Evelyn felt a cold sickness curl in her stomach. This was not commerce. This was strangulation. "My crops are dead," Abel whispered. "My wife." Crowther pushed the paper closer. "I am offering you life. Samuel, sign the paper, get your water, or walk away thirsty. Your choice." Evelyn watched Abel's shoulders slump. She saw his wife standing by their wagon, holding a listless child, the girl's face pale. Abel looked at them. His hand, cracked and stained with soil, reached for the pen. He signed. Jago laughed, a short, ugly bark. He rolled a barrel of water from Crowther's wagon. It was stamped Crowther Mining. Abel did not look at it. He just stared at the paper he had signed, his entire life reduced to a smear of ink. Evelyn felt a hot, useless anger. She wanted to scream. She wanted to ride over there and tear that paper from Crowther's hand, but she knew what that would get her. She was one woman. They were armed men, and the law was bought. High on the ridge above the camp, where the basalt rock shimmered like dark glass, a man lay flat. He had been there since sunrise. He was invisible. Ashki Nez. He did not need to hear the words. He had seen this play before. He watched the paper pass from the large, clean man to the small, broken farmer. He watched the farmer's hand shake. He was dying. He was a warrior. Though he no longer wore the paint, he had been a scout for his people, a messenger who had run for days without stopping. He carried the scars of the long walk, the forced removal of his people, not on his skin, but deep inside, a place of cold memory. He knew the shape of theft. He was 29, his face calm, his eyes missing nothing. He was not here for the farmer. He was here for Crowther. He was counting. 4 men today, 2 with rifles, 2 with sidearms. He noted the way the heavy one, Jago, shifted his weight onto his left leg, a bad hip. He marked it. He catalogued it. He was a patient man. This land had taught him patience. The rocks and the wind did not hurry. They just endured, and they remembered everything. Evelyn pushed Bess forward, schooling her face into a mask of polite business. She had medicine for the camp foreman. She kept her head down, her eyes averted from Crowther as she passed. But he saw her. He always saw everything. He tipped his hat, a gesture that was too polite, a mockery in the crushing heat. "Miss Hart, a lovely day for commerce." Evelyn offered only a tight nod. She finished her delivery, took the foreman's signature, and turned the mule for home. The anger burned inside her, so hot it felt like thirst. She took the shortcut back, guiding Bess down the crumbling embankment into the dry bed of the Salt River. The cottonwoods that lined the banks were skeletons, their yellow leaves brittle, whispering in the hot wind. This was where the water should be. This was the artery of the valley. Now, it was just a grave. Bess stopped. The mule's head shot up, its ears pinned. It snorted, shuffling backward. Evelyn scanned the brush. "What is it, girl?" He rose from the shadows of a dead cottonwood, and her heart slammed against her ribs. He seemed to rise from the baked earth itself, a figure of dust and silence. He was tall, lean in the way of a runner. He wore worn canvas trousers and a faded blue shirt, the clothes of a white man. But he was not. His black hair was tied back with a strip of leather. He was Navajo. She did not know his name. She only knew what the town said. The dying were angry. They were restless. They blamed the town for the water Crowther was stealing. There were rumors of raids. Her hand moved, fast and sure, to the small pistol her father insisted she carry in her saddlebag. She did not draw it, but her fingers gripped the walnut handle. He just stood there, maybe 20 yards away. He was not moving toward her. He was just watching her. His face was still, his expression unreadable. She forced her voice to be steady, though it came out thin. "What do you want?" It was not a question. It was a challenge. Ashki Nez looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes. He saw her hand on the pistol. He also saw the faint tremor of anger that still vibrated through her. The same anger he had seen when she watched Crowther choke the life out of that farmer. He had seen her watching. This one was not soft. He had no words for her. Explanations were for friends, and she was not a friend. She was just another white person standing on land that was not hers, breathing air that belonged to the holy people. But she was not Crowther. She was not Jago. She was something else. He offered no explanation. He did not tell her he was tracking Crowther's water wagons. He did not tell her this dry riverbed was a wound in his own soul, a profound insult to his people who were falling sick from the bad water in the low wells. He just gave a single, slow nod. It was not a greeting. It was not a surrender. It was an acknowledgement. He saw her. Then he turned. In 2 silent steps, he was gone, melting back into the gray brush and the juniper. He did not make a sound. Evelyn sat on the mule, her heart hammering against her ribs, her palms slick with sweat. He had not threatened her. He had not moved. He had just been there. It was a different kind of presence from Silas Crowther. Crowther's presence was a noise, a pressure that demanded you bend. This man's presence was a silence, vast and old as the red rocks. He had looked at her, not at her, the way Crowther did, to see what she was worth or what he could take. He had looked through her, as if weighing her against the dust and the heat. She nudged Bess forward, her hands shaking slightly. The air was thick and still. The town of Salt Crossing was thirsty, and its people were growing mean, poisoned by rumor and fear. Evelyn Hart, daughter of the apothecary, rode on, realizing that the fight was not just about water or land or even Silas Crowther. It was about decency, and decency seemed to be the driest thing in the entire Arizona territory. She was afraid, deeply afraid, that the choice of what to do next had already been made for her. The sound was the first warning. It was not a sound, but the end of one. For weeks, the only comfort in the suffocating nights of Salt Crossing had been the faint, distant whisper of water moving over rock. It was the last tributary, high in the canyons, feeding the small brush dam the Dine had built to catch what the drought had not yet claimed. It was a sound of survival. And 3 nights after Evelyn Hart had seen the Navajo warrior in the dry riverbed, that sound stopped. The silence was absolute, heavier and more terrifying than the heat. Evelyn woke before dawn, her thin shift clinging to her back. The air in her small room above the apothecary was stale and hot. She knew before she looked. She ran downstairs, past her father's room where his dry cough echoed, and out into the small yard behind the shop. Her medicinal garden. It was her pride, her laboratory, and her one true connection to this dusty land. She had irrigated it with a tiny, precious channel diverted from the town's main well, which was itself fed by the tributary. The channel was dry. The soil, still dark and damp from her watering the night before, was already pulling away from the stems. Her peppermint, her chamomile, her foxglove plants, they were already dying. The leaves were limp, their green fading to a sickly yellow-gray. The water was not low. It was gone. She ran to the town square. It was barely 6 in the morning, but the square was crowded. Marshal Brody was standing on the steps of his office, holding a shotgun, looking bored. The town's main well, a deep, stone-lined pit, was surrounded by 20 people, all yelling. Silas Crowther was there, watching from the boardwalk in front of the saloon. He was drinking coffee from a porcelain cup. The bucket came up from the well. It held perhaps 3 inches of brown, sluggish mud. The panic that followed was a raw, ugly thing. The last reliable water in Salt Crossing was gone. Crowther stepped forward. His voice carried easily in the thin air. A terrible shame. Friends, I will open my own wells to the town. For a fair price. Of course, until this unfortunate shortage is resolved. He smiled, and Evelyn felt the same cold sickness she had felt watching Samuel Abel sign away his farm. Crowther had not just diverted the water. He had stolen the town's future and was now selling it back to them, one expensive drop at a time. For 2 days, the town simmered. The heat rose to 110 degrees. The dust was a red fog. Evelyn kept her father's delivery schedule. The apothecary needed the money, now more than ever. The price of Crowther's water was extortion. She had one delivery left, the one she dreaded. A crate of laudanum and bandages for the Crowther mining warehouse by the railroad spur. She pushed her mule, Bess, through the heat. The warehouse was a large, ugly structure of raw pine. Jago, Crowther's heavy-set foreman, met her at the door. He seemed amused, his eyes lingering on her. "The boss is busy, medicine girl." He told her to put the crate in the back shed, by the tracks. Evelyn slid the heavy crate from the mule's back. She hated this place. It smelled of power. She half-dragged the crate to the designated shed, a low building away from the main warehouse. The door was unlocked. The heat inside was stifling. It did not smell of grain or mule feed. It smelled wrong. It was a sharp, chemical smell, like sulfur and something oily. She left the crate as instructed. Her eyes were adjusting to the dim light. In the back corner, half hidden by a stack of tarpaulins, were other crates, dozens of them. They were not mining drills or picks. She stepped closer. The labels were clear, stenciled in black. Excelsior blasting powder. Beside them were smaller, heavier boxes marked detonators. Copper, and neatly coiled beside them. Rolls of fuses. She had seen dynamite before. The railroad crews used it constantly. But this was a massive quantity. Far too much for simple silver mining. And the shipping labels were fresh. This had just arrived on the train. This was the chemical smell. She heard a single boot scrape on the gravel outside. Jago stood in the doorway, blocking the light. His bulk filled the frame. He asked, his voice soft, if she was lost. Evelyn's heart hammered. She tried to keep her voice flat. She said she was just leaving the medicine. Jago took one step inside. The smile he usually wore was gone. His eyes were flat and cold. He told her she was a nosy woman. He moved faster than she thought possible for a man his size. He grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh like claws. Evelyn reacted without thinking. She was still holding a small, heavy glass bottle of carbolic acid she was meant to deliver to the main office. She swung it, hard, into his chest. The bottle did not break, but the heavy impact drove the air from his lungs. He grunted, his grip loosening for just a second. It was enough. Evelyn ripped her arm free and ran. She bolted from the shed, sprinting past the astonished mule. She heard Jago roar her name. She heard 2 other sets of boots. Not Jago. He was too slow, too heavy. He had sent his men. She did not run toward town. They would catch her in the open street. She ran the other way, toward the maze of dry arroyos and red rock canyons that skirted the edge of the territory. It was a stupid choice. It was the only one she had. The heat was a solid wall. Her lungs burned. The sound of the men behind her was steady, unhurried. They knew this land. She did not. She scrambled down a loose bank of gravel into a dry wash, the rocks slipping and turning under her boots. The canyon walls rose up on either side, sheer and red. She ran until her legs gave out, collapsing against a ledge of sandstone. It was a dead end. The 2 men appeared at the mouth of the arroyo. They were railroad men, hired guns. They were not breathing hard. They slowed their pace, walking toward her, savoring it. One of them unbuckled his heavy gun belt and let it drop to the dust. He said the boss did not appreciate people sniffing around his property. Evelyn pressed herself against the rock, her hand searching for her pistol. It was in the saddlebag, on the mule, back at the warehouse. A wave of cold, sharp terror washed over her. The sound was a faint hiss, a whisper in the hot air. The man who had dropped his belt grunted. A wet, choked sound. and pitched forward onto his face. A dark, heavy rock, its edges sharp, was embedded in the back of his skull. The second man spun, fumbling for the pistol at his hip. He looked up. Ashki-Nez was on the canyon rim, outlined against the white-hot sky. He was there for 1 second, and then he was gone. He did not drop. He flowed down the rock wall, moving like a shadow. The guard fired a shot. Wild. The sound cracked against the rocks, deafeningly loud. Ashki was on him. He did not use a weapon. He used his hands and his body. There was a sharp strike to the man's throat, a brutal twist of his knee. The man collapsed, gagging, his pistol flying from his hand. It was over in less than 5 seconds. The arroyo was silent again, except for the man's choked breathing and Evelyn's own ragged gasps. Ashki-Nez stood over the fallen guard. He picked up the man's pistol, studied it for a moment, and then threw it with contemptuous strength far into the boulders. He looked at the two twitching men, his face calm, detached. Then he looked at Evelyn. His eyes were not calm, they were blazing. Evelyn pushed herself up, her whole body shaking. She whispered a thank you. He cut her off. His English was perfect, each word clipped and precise. He told her she was careless. He told her she was loud. The accusation, after the terror, sparked her anger back to life. She stood straight, though her knees felt like water. She told him they blew the dam. Crowther. She had seen the proof in his warehouse. Dynamite, blasting caps, enough to destroy the whole river. He studied her. He seemed to be weighing her, measuring her words against the hot rock in the silence. He finally spoke. Proof is a white man's word. It is a piece of paper. He said his people, his family, were sick. They had no water. He told her that her noise, her proof, would only bring rifles down on his village. He stepped closer. She could smell the faint scent of juniper and dust. He told her plainly, he had saved her. She would not fight his people's war for them. Evelyn protested. She had to tell someone. The marshal. He almost laughed. It was a cold, bitter sound. He told her the man with the star was bought. He told her she had seen nothing. She had seen only what Crowther wanted her to see. He pointed back toward town. He told her to go home. He told her not to be stupid again. Before she could form another word, he was moving. He climbed the sheer canyon wall as easily as another man might walk a staircase. He reached the rim and dissolved into the shimmering heat. Evelyn was left alone with the two men. One was unconscious. The other was still choking in the dust. She did not wait. She turned and ran, stumbling back toward Salt Crossing. Ashki had been wrong about one thing. She had to tell someone. Silence was the same as acceptance. She stormed into Marshal Brody's office, ignoring the men who stared at her from the saloon porch. Her dress was torn, her face smeared with red dust. Brody was sitting with his boots on his desk, cleaning his fingernails with a pocket knife. He looked up, his expression one of mild surprise. She told him everything, the warehouse, the dynamite, the chase, the two men in the arroyo. He listened patiently, nodding. When she was finished, out of breath and shaking with fury, he slowly closed his knife and put it in his pocket. He smiled, a slow, paternal smile that made her skin crawl. He told her, Miss Hart, it seemed she had taken a terrible fright. The heat does that to folks, especially women. He said he had already heard about the dam. It was a sad business. He said he had it on good authority that the Dine had broken it themselves. A desperate, foolish act, trying to hoard what little water was left. He said Silas Crowther was deeply concerned, worried the savages might try to raid the town next. He advised her to go home. He told her to have her father, the doctor, give her a laudanum tincture. He told her to rest. Evelyn stood there, stunned into silence. The lie was so complete, so perfectly constructed. She walked out of the office. The sun was setting, staining the dust red. In the saloon, she heard a loud voice, Jago. He was buying a round of drinks. His voice was thick with false anger. He was telling a crowd of thirsty, frightened men that the Dine had finally declared war. They had destroyed the last of the water. The men in the saloon were listening. They were nodding. They were angry. They were not angry at Silas Crowther. They were angry at the people who were now sick and thirsty in the canyon, surrounded by Crowther's armed guards. Evelyn went back to the apothecary. Her father was asleep, his cough quiet for now. She sat at his desk, the small room dark and hot. Ashki was right. Brody was bought. The town was a tinderbox, and Crowther held the match. Her loud, clumsy truth had only made things worse. But silence was impossible. She looked at the wall, a faded poster, tacked there for months. It announced the arrival of Judge Cyrus Bainbridge, a United States Federal Circuit judge. He was scheduled to arrive on the 10th of the month, in 1 week, to handle railroad land disputes. Federal. The word felt heavy. It meant he was above Brody. He was above Crowther. He was, perhaps, above the casual, brutal theft of an entire river. Evelyn Hart pulled a clean sheet of foolscap from her father's drawer. She lit a lamp. She dipped the pen in the ink. She would not be loud this time. She would be meticulous. She began to write. She wrote about the farmer, Samuel Abel, signing away his land for a barrel of water. She described the chemical smell in the warehouse. She named the crates Excelsior blasting powder. She described the 2 men who chased her and the marshal's polite dismissal. She would make a copy. She would hide them. And when that train arrived, she would find a way to get this letter into the hands of Judge Bainbridge. It was a thin, desperate hope, a piece of paper against a wall of rifles. But it was the only thing she had left. The week that followed was a slow suffocation. The 10th of the month, the day of Judge Bainbridge's arrival, approached with the dread of a coming storm. Evelyn Hart kept her 2 copies of the letter. One was tucked beneath the false bottom of her father's cash box, the other folded so small it fit inside her left boot. The town of Salt Crossing had turned brittle. Silas Crowther's wagons, guarded by men with rifles, sold water from his deep wells at a price that amounted to theft. The town's main well was dry mud. The air was thick, not just with dust, but with rumor. Marshal Brody made a great show of riding patrols, claiming he was protecting the town from the Dine, who he insisted had destroyed the dam. The anger in the saloons grew as the thirst deepened. On the morning of the 10th, the heat was already a heavy blanket. Evelyn felt the date as a knot in her stomach. She was sweeping the boardwalk in front of the apothecary when she felt the vibration, a faint tremor in the wood, traveling up from the earth. The train. She looked east, toward the pass. A smudge of black smoke stained the pale blue sky. The whistle came a moment later, thin and distant. Then the sound changed. It was not a normal whistle. It was a long, sustained scream of steam, a sound of pure panic. It was followed by a low, echoing boom that shook the windows of the shop. Dynamite. Seconds later, a volley of rifle shots, sharp and distinct, cracked across the plains. The town froze. Men poured out of the saloon. Evelyn ran to the end of the street, her heart hammering against her ribs. The train appeared, limping out of the pass. It was moving too fast, its wheels sparking on the tracks. It did not slow for the station. The engine car was riddled with bullet holes. Black smoke billowed from a passenger car near the back. It roared past the town. The engineer slumped over the controls, his hand locked on the whistle. It finally ground to a halt a mile down the track, a wounded beast dying in the dust. Marshal Brody, his face a mask of annoyance, gathered a few men and rode out. Evelyn waited, the letter in her boot suddenly feeling as heavy as lead. The news came back an hour later, carried by a shaken railroad man. The train had been ambushed at Apache Pass. A small dynamite charge on the tracks had slowed it, and riders had poured down from the rocks. They were not robbers. They did not touch the mail car or the strongbox. They went straight to the private car at the back. Judge Cyrus Bainbridge was dead, shot multiple times through the window. His clerk was also dead. His briefcase, filled with federal documents, was gone. Evelyn retreated into the shadows of the apothecary. The world tilted. Her hope, her paper shield, was gone. The attack was not random. It was a targeted execution. They knew he was coming. They knew which car he was in. Someone in Salt Crossing had told them. High in the basalt rocks, Ashki Nez had watched the smoke. He had heard the shots. He was not surprised. This was the way of the white man. When their paper laws failed, they used lead. He moved toward the pass, keeping to the high ground. He arrived at the ambush site long before Brody's clumsy posse. He read the tracks in the dust. 10 riders. They had waited patiently, their horses hidden in a dry arroyo. They were disciplined, they fired, they took what they wanted, and they vanished. He followed their trail. It did not lead south toward the border, or east, toward the other territories. It led north, scattering into the foothills of the high mesa, toward Crowther's land. But he found something else first, a mile from the pass, on a high bluff that overlooked both the town and the eastern tracks. He found the ashes of a small, contained fire. Beside it, tucked into the rocks, was the stub of a torch, its cloth head soaked in oil. The riders in the pass could not have seen the train approaching. They would have needed a signal from here. Ashki stood and looked down at Salt Crossing. The bluff was known as St. Mary's Point. It was directly below the small, whitewashed bell tower of the Catholic mission. The signal had not come from the hills. It had come from the town, from the house of God. Evelyn spent 2 days in a state of numb despair. Marshal Brody, with great ceremony, declared the attack an act of war by the Dane, retaliation for the town's vigilance. The story was perfect. It sealed the town's fear and justified Crowther's armed guards. Ashki found her late the second night. She had stepped out behind the apothecary, trying to breathe air that was not thick with her father's coughing. He was simply there, a shadow standing beside her. Dead, dry garden. She did not startle this time. She had almost been expecting him. He spoke, his voice quiet. "The judge is dead." She replied that she knew. Ashki told her the men who killed him were signaled a torch from the bell tower of the mission. Evelyn processed this. The church, Father Hale, the timid priest who always seemed to be sweating, his eyes darting. It felt impossible. Then it felt horribly possible. She told him they had to tell people. They had to expose him. Ashki's voice was flat. He told her no. He told her that was her way, loud, fast, and useless. He asked her what would happen. She would accuse the priest. The priest would deny it. The marshal would laugh. And Crowther's men would find her in a dark alley. He told her the proof she saw, the blasting powder, was gone. He had checked the warehouse himself. The shed was empty, clean. It was her word against theirs. He told her he did not want to win a small fight. He wanted to win the war. He wanted Crowther gone. Not just angered. To do that, he needed proof that a federal judge would believe, proof that would bring soldiers. Evelyn argued, her voice a fierce whisper. She told him people were suffering now. The townspeople were being bled dry. His people. His voice cut her off. Sharp as flint, he told her not to speak of his people. She stood her ground. She said she had knowledge he did not. She knew medicine. She understood the white man's laws, his papers, his machines. He knew the canyons, the tracks, the silence. He needed her. He was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the dry rattle of the dead leaves in her garden. He finally said they would work together, but they would do it his way. Quiet, they needed allies. Evelyn thought immediately of Deputy Tom Willis. Tom was young, quiet, and overshadowed by Brody. But Evelyn had seen him watching Crowther. His eyes filled with a disgust he tried to hide. He was the only lawman in town who had not been bought. Ashki spoke of the church. The signal meant someone inside. Evelyn went to the mission the next morning. She brought a small tin of chamomile for Sister May. Sister May was a tall, stern woman from New England who ran the small mission school with an iron will. She was practical. and Evelyn suspected she missed very little. She found Sister May scrubbing the chapel floor, her face set in lines of disapproval. Evelyn did not accuse. She asked if Sister May had noticed anything unusual the night of the train attack. Sister May stopped scrubbing. She looked at Evelyn, her gray eyes sharp. She said it was very unusual. Father Hale had been agitated all day. He had insisted on ringing the Vespers bell himself, something he never did. He had climbed the tower at dusk. Sister May lowered her voice. She said she had seen a light up there, long after the bell. A lantern, she had thought, but it had flared, then vanished. When he came down, he was pale, and he smelled of whiskey. He had been in the confessional ever since, praying. Evelyn left the mission, her blood cold. She found Deputy Tom Willis at the livery, inspecting the horses. She spoke quietly. She told him she did not trust Marshal Brody. She told him she believed Crowther was responsible for the water and for the train. Tom stopped his work. He looked around the street, his young face troubled. He told her to be careful. He told her he had his own doubts. The bullets Brody had dug from the engine car were from a Henry rifle, the kind Crowther's men carried, but Brody had logged them as old musket balls. He said he was just one man. He had no authority to overrule the marshal. Evelyn met his gaze. She told him he was not just one man. He was two. She left him to think on that. The town's suffering deepened. Crowther raised the price of water again. The sickness, dysentery, began to spread. It started, as it always did, with the poor. Evelyn was in the apothecary, her father resting in the back, when a dying woman slipped into the alley. She was older, her face etched with panic. She was clutching a small bundle. Evelyn went to the back door. The woman held the bundle out. It was a child, a little girl, no more than 4 years old. The child was limp, her skin burning with fever, her eyes sunken. The signs were unmistakable. Dysentery. She was dying of thirst and bad water. The woman's voice was a dry croak. "Help, please!" Evelyn looked down the street. Jago and 2 other of Crowther's men were on the saloon porch, watching. Evelyn made her choice. She pulled the woman and child inside and bolted the back door. For 2 hours, she worked in her small, hot room above the shop. She used her own tiny, hoarded supply of clean water. She mixed it with salts and sugar. She administered drops of paregoric to calm the child's system, patiently, drop by drop. She forced the fluid between the child's cracked lips. The woman sat on the floor, perfectly still, watching every move. By evening, the child's fever had not broken, but the worst of the sickness had passed. She was sleeping. Evelyn packed a small satchel. She put in all the paregoric she had left, and a large pouch of water purifying salts. She gave it to the woman. She told her to go, quickly, before the moon was high. The woman stood. She looked at Evelyn. She did not speak. She simply touched her own heart. Then the child. Then Evelyn. It was a promise. She slipped out the back door and was gone. Ashki was waiting in the alley, hidden in the shadows of the next building. He had seen the woman arrive. He had seen her leave. His voice was a low snarl. He told her she was a fool. She had risked everything. Her life, his entire plan, all for one child. Evelyn turned on him, her own anger, born of fear and exhaustion, rising to meet his. She told him the child was dying. She asked if his slow, careful plan was worth that child's life. He did not answer. He stared at her, his face a conflict of fury and something she could not name. He told her it was too late. He told her the town was talking. Jago's men had seen the woman enter the alley. They had seen her leave. The woman who asked too many questions at the mission, the medicine girl who locked her back door. She did not understand. He told her to go to the town square. He told her to listen. She walked to the front of the shop. The saloon was loud, the yellow light spilling onto the dusty street. She could hear one voice clearly. Jago, he was drunk. He was shouting about traitors. He said there were spies in Salt Crossing. helping the savages who murdered the judge. He said that white woman, the little medicine girl, was one of them. He raised his glass. He said Silas Crowther was a generous man. He was offering $100 in gold to the man who brought the girl to him. He just wanted to ask her a few questions. Evelyn stepped back from the window, her blood cold. It was not an accusation. It was a bounty. She was no longer a citizen. She was a target. She quietly slid the bolt across the apothecary's front door. The sound of the metal in the quiet shop as loud as a gunshot. The sound of Jago's voice, thick with malice and amplified by the saloon's approval, was the closing of a lock. Evelyn Hart stood in the darkness of her father's apothecary, the thin bolt she had just slid across the door feeling like a piece of straw against a tidal wave. She was a prisoner in her own home. $100. In this thirsty, desperate town, that was enough to turn any neighbor into a hunter. The back door clicked open. She spun, her hand flying to her throat. Ashki Nez slipped inside. He did not make a sound. He was just a void in the deeper shadows of the storage room. His eyes found hers in the dark. He spoke in a whisper that was pure command. "Get your medicine, what you need, and a coat. We leave now." "Her father." She panicked. She could not leave her father. His cough was a dry rustle from the next room. Ashki's voice was stone. "He is safer without you. They want you. If you stay, you paint his door with your blood." The truth of it was a physical blow. She was not a comfort. She was a danger. She scribbled a note, her hand shaking. "Father, I have gone to the rail camp. An emergency. Medicine needed. Will return. I have left your laudanum." It was a clumsy lie. She placed the bottle of opiate, a glass of water from her precious hidden jug, and the note by his bedside. He was asleep, his breathing shallow. She kissed his dry forehead. A silent, terrible apology. She grabbed her medical bag, stuffing it with quinine, bandages, and her remaining purifying salts. She put on a dark canvas duster. Ashki led her out the back door. He did not use the alley. He moved through the tiny, overgrown yards that separated the buildings, a ghost flowing between sheds and dead gardens. The noise from the saloon covered the faint crunch of their boots. They crossed the dry riverbed, the white alkali dust rising in pale clouds around their ankles, and melted into the canyons. They walked for hours, climbing into the high, broken country. The moon was a sliver, offering just enough light to see the rocks, which Ashki seemed to navigate by memory. Evelyn's legs burned, her lungs ached. She was a town woman, and this was his land. He never slowed. When the sky began to gray in the east, they arrived. It was not a camp. It was a collection of hogans, the traditional dome-shaped dwellings of the Dine. Tucked so perfectly into a fold of the canyon, they were invisible until you were upon them. It was quiet, but it was a sick quiet. He stopped her at the edge of the settlement. He told her there were rules. She would not speak unless spoken to. She would not stare. She would follow him and do exactly as he said. He led her to a hogan set slightly apart, the woman from the apothecary, the one whose child she had treated, was waiting. She introduced herself as Tiana. She led Evelyn inside. The child was sleeping, her breathing still shallow but regular. In the center of the hogan, sitting on a pile of blankets, was an old woman. Her face was a map of the canyons, 1,000 wrinkles of sun and wisdom. Her eyes, black and bright, fixed on Evelyn. This was Grandmother Nabahi, the matriarch, the elder. Evelyn, remembering Ashki's command, stood silently, her eyes lowered, her medical bag clutched in her hand. Nabahi spoke, her voice like stones rolling in a dry creek. Ashki translated. His voice soft. "She asks why you are here." Evelyn replied, her voice low. "I am in danger." Nabahi spoke again. Ashki translated. "The danger is on you, not us. You bring it here." Tiana, the child's mother, spoke then, a fast, quiet stream of Dine. She pointed to the sleeping child, then to Evelyn. Nabahi was silent for a long moment. She looked at Evelyn, a gaze that seemed to peel back her skin. Finally, she nodded once. Ashki translated, "You saved one of ours. You may rest here until the moon is full. Then you go." Evelyn bowed her head. She opened her medical bag. She said, if she may, she would like to help. She had medicine for the sickness. Nabahi watched her. Ashki said, "She tells you to show respect. Our ways are not your ways." Evelyn, taught by her pharmacist father, understood precision. She asked him to teach her. Over the next few days, she learned. She learned to greet the elders with Yayatia, the soft, formal greeting. She learned to enter the Hogan and move to the left, the sunwise direction. She learned that silence was not empty, but a form of conversation. She worked alongside Tiana, cleaning the sick, boiling the water, and carefully administering the purifying salts and medicines. She was no longer Dr. Hart's daughter. She was the Azi Ainili, the medicine woman, and she was earning her keep. One night, she and Ashki sat by a small, smokeless fire of juniper wood, hidden in a cleft of rock overlooking the village. The sickness was easing, but the despair was not. Evelyn finally asked the question that burned in her. Why him? Why go after Crowther this way? Quietly, slowly. Why not just fight? Ashki stared into the low flames. He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. When he spoke, his voice was different, rougher. "When I was a boy, he said, the soldiers came. They said the land was theirs. They marched us east, for many hundreds of miles, to a place called Huildi, Bosque Redondo. He said the name as if it were a curse. My uncle's son, he was small, like the girl you saved. He died on the march. My cousin, he was a strong man, a runner. He died in the bad earth there, of a sickness in the lungs. We were there for 4 winters. We ate flour filled with bugs. We watched our children and our old ones die." He picked up a stick, his knuckles white. "When we returned, we swore we would not be moved again. I carry a debt," he said, his voice flat with a terrible weight. "A debt to my family who did not return. My duty is to preserve life, not to take it. Crowther wants a war. He wants to shoot us like coyotes and call it justice. I will not give him that war. I will not make more ghosts." Evelyn watched him, her own anger feeling small and useless. She was fighting for a principle. He was fighting for the memory of the dead. "I am sorry," she said. He looked at her, his eyes dark. He told her not to be sorry, and he told her to be useful. The work began. Deputy Tom Willis was their only link to Salt Crossing. He met Ashki in the canyons at dawn, risking his career and his life. The 3 of them gathered in a hidden cave. The map they were building spread on a flat rock. Tom brought news. Brody is on Crowther's payroll. I saw the marshal's private ledger. A payment, every month, for security. They are one and the same. Evelyn told them about Sister May, the signal from the bell tower, Father Hale. Tom cursed under his breath. He said that explained why Hale had been so quick to support Brody's story about a dine raid. Ashki laid a long finger on the map he had drawn from memory. The map of the high mesa. He told them Crowther did not just divert the spring. That was a lie for the town. The spring was a trickle. The mine was using thousands of gallons a day. He told them Crowther had run a pipe, an illegal line, tapping the deep aquifer. He was bleeding the whole valley dry, from below. Evelyn said that was the proof they needed. Proof that would stand up in a federal court, if they could ever reach one. Tom agreed. He said they also needed the names of the hired guns, the ones who hit the train. He thought he knew a way. Brody kept a roster of all armed men in town, a list he shared with Crowther. The plan was set. Tom would try to get the roster in the ledger. Ashki and Evelyn would go to the high mesa and document the illegal pipe. The mesa was dangerous. It was Crowther's land, patrolled by his guards. Ashki led Evelyn up a narrow, forgotten goat trail, moving only at dusk. The sky to the west was a bruised, angry purple, and the air was dead still. "A storm is coming," Ashki said. "A bad one." They found the pipe just as the wind hit. It was not a small thing. It was a thick, iron pipe, black and new, snaking out of the rocks and disappearing into the ground, heading toward the mine. It was hidden under a crude shelter of juniper and rock. The wind came up, not as a breeze, but as a solid wall of yellow dust. A sandstorm. It shrieked, scouring the rock, blinding them. They had to cross a narrow rock bridge over a deep chasm to get a clear view of the intake. Ashki tied a rope around her waist, then his own. The wind tore at her, trying to pull her from the ledge. Evelyn shouted over the roar, "The rope! It is fraying!" She was right. The old hemp line, dragged over the sharp sandstone, was snapping, strand by strand. She froze. The chasm below was a roaring mouth of dust. Ashki's voice cut through her panic. It was not loud, but it was absolute. "Do not look down. Look at me." His eyes held hers. "One hand, then one foot. Slow. I have you." She did what he said. One hand, one foot. The wind screamed. She felt the rope give another sudden, sick lurch. She kept her eyes on his. He did not move. He was an anchor in the storm. She fell onto the far ledge, scraping her hands, gasping. He was beside her a second later, cutting the frayed rope. They huddled in a shallow cave, waiting for the storm to pass, the world reduced to a roaring, yellow darkness. Ashki's hand was bleeding, a deep, ragged cut from the rock and the rope. Evelyn, her own fear receding, took charge. This was her ground. She told him to sit. She cleaned the wound with her purified water. He flinched, but did not pull away. She took a small tin from her bag. It was a dark, sticky salve. She told him it was juniper resin and creosote, an antiseptic, better than carbolic. She had learned it from Tiana. She bandaged his hand tightly, her touch firm and professional. Their roles had reversed. He watched her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. To pass the time, he took a stick and drew in the fine dust that covered the cave floor. He drew a small track, 3 toes forward. Rabbit. He drew another, 4 toes, claws showing. Coyote. He drew a third, a moccasin print, the toe dragging slightly. He said that was a man, walking heavy, carrying a rifle. He told her to look at the ground. It told a story. She watched, mesmerized. He was teaching her his language, the language of the earth. When the storm had quieted, he reached into a pouch at his belt. He pulled out a small, sharp knife. The handle was juniper, polished smooth. Carved into the wood was a perfect, tiny bluebird, a dolly. He pressed it into her hand. He said the dolly always finds its way home. It was so she would remember the way back, to safety. It was not a gift, it was a tool, a promise. They returned to the village to find chaos. Tom Willis was there. His face was bruised, his shirt torn. His badge was gone. He told them it was a setup. He had gone for the roster. Brody and Jago were waiting for him. They had planted a bag of Crowther's gold in his desk. They accused him of taking bribes from the dine. Brody had suspended him, taken his badge. He was lucky he was not in a cell. Tom slammed his fist against the cave wall. He told them it was over. Brody controlled the law. Crowther controlled the water. And they were out of time. Evelyn looked at the knife in her hand, the bluebird. She looked at Ashki, his bandaged hand. She looked at Tom, his face a mask of furious defeat. She told Tom he was wrong. She said they could not use the law, so they would use the people. Tom asked what people, the town that had put a price on her head. Evelyn said the harvest festival was in 2 days. The entire town would be there. Every farmer, every railroad man, every family. Silas Crowther would be there, acting like the town's savior. Tom looked at her, then at Ashki. He saw no fear in their eyes, only resolve. His own anger cooled, hardening into a new shape. He nodded, a slow, dangerous motion. All right, no more hiding. We burn the house down. We present the evidence, all of it. The pipe, the ledger, the roster. We do it at the festival, in front of everyone. He said if Crowther wanted a fight, he could have one, in broad daylight. They had one day. The Harvest Festival was their deadline, their one chance to detonate the truth in a place Crowther could not control. The decision, made in the grim silence of the cave, was absolute. They would not wait for a law that would not come. They would bring the evidence directly to the people. This meant returning to the high mesa. It meant walking directly into the territory of the men who hunted her. Ashkey, Evelyn, and Deputy Tom Willis met in the gray light before dawn, hidden in a dry wash miles from town. Sister May was already at her post, working within the mission walls, her focus on the church ledgers. Tom, his face still bruised from Jago's work, was a changed man. The caution was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp anger. He would remain in Salt Crossing. He had to. He told them his job was to find the list of hired guns who hit the train. He knew Marshal Brody kept a private roster. He also had to organize the few townsfolk he still trusted, men who had lost land to Crowther, to be ready to stand when the time came. He told Evelyn and Ashkey that their task was the most dangerous. They needed the final, physical proof of the water theft. He looked at Evelyn, his expression grim. He said if they were not back by noon the next day, at the festival, he would assume the worst and proceed with what he had. Ashkey just nodded. He and Evelyn turned and began the climb, disappearing into the red rock. The ascent to the high mesa was harder this time. There was no sandstorm to cover their movement, only a bright, clear sky that exposed them on the ledges. Ashkey moved with a slow, agonizing patience, testing every rock, listening to the wind. Evelyn followed, matching his footsteps, her body aching, her senses stretched thin. The small, carved bluebird knife he had given her was tucked in her belt, its wooden handle a strange comfort. They reached the illegal pipeline where it snaked along the high cliffs, a black iron scar on the red stone. Ashkey had named this place, in his language, the Wind Shelf. It was aptly named. The wind did not blow. It lived. It was a constant, solid force that tried to peel them from the rock face. They followed the pipe toward its source. Seeking the junction box in the pumping station Ashkey suspected was hidden near the aquifer. The path narrowed to a ledge barely 2 feet wide, a sheer drop of 800 feet on one side. Evelyn was focused on the ground. She saw a dark, oily seepage where 2 sections of the pipe were imperfectly joined. This was it. This was the contamination she had smelled in the town's water. This was the proof. She unslung her medical bag, her movements slow and careful against the wind. She knelt, opening a small glass specimen jar. She needed a sample of the soil, the sediment stained black with machine oil. She reached down, scraping the earth with a small trowel. As she leaned, a sudden, violent gust hit the shelf. It caught her canvas duster, the one she had worn since fleeing her home, and turned it into a sail. The force was immediate. It tore her backward, her boots scraping for purchase on the loose gravel. She cried out, a sound stolen by the wind. She was going over the edge. He was not there, and then he was... Ashkey moved like a hawk striking. He did not grab her hand. He lunged, his entire body a counterweight, one arm locking around her waist like a steel band, the other hand gripping the iron pipe itself. He held her entire weight as she dangled for one horrifying second over the abyss. The wind tore at them, ripping her duster open. Her lighter dress underneath was whipped flat against her body. She was pinned against him, her face pressed into the rough canvas of his shirt, her arms trapped between them. She could feel the hard, steady beat of his heart against her cheek. For a full 10 seconds, they just breathed, or tried to. Against the roaring wind, he slowly, carefully, hauled her back onto the narrow ledge. She was shaking, not with cold, but with sheer, animal terror. She could not speak. He did not let go. Not yet. He kept his arm locked around her, pinning her to the rock wall, shielding her from the wind. He looked down at her, his dark eyes intense, checking for injury. Then his expression shifted. The severity softened. Just a fraction, and the corner of his mouth twitched. His voice was rough, barely audible over the shriek of the wind. He spoke close to her ear. He said it seemed fate had a sense of humor. The absurdity of the comment, of the old joke from the outline they once discussed, broke the tension. A choked sound, half a laugh, half a sob, escaped her. He held her gaze. It was warm. It was not the look of a stranger, or just a protector. It was the look of a man. Evelyn felt a flush of heat that had nothing to do with the sun. She was intensely aware of his arm around her waist, of the strength in his hand still gripping the pipe. The wind, the danger, the entire world shrank to the space of 6 inches between them. He saw the shift in her eyes. He saw her fear replaced by something else, something complicated and new. His own expression tightened. He slowly, deliberately, released his hold on her waist. He stepped back, giving her space on the narrow ledge. He turned his attention back to the canyon, his face becoming a mask of calm observation once more. He had built a wall. It was a necessary one. Establishing boundaries, he spoke, his voice flat, all warmth gone. We have work to do. Evelyn nodded. Gathering her composure, she pushed her hair, whipped free by the wind, out of her face. She focused on the task. She told him he was right. The moment was over, but it remained between them. A small, bright thing in the howling wind. They worked quickly. Evelyn gathered the oily sediment. She used her notebook, drawing a precise map of the pipe, its location relative to the highest peak, and the pumping station she could now see in a hollow below. This was the coordinates, the irrefutable location. They moved down from the shelf, following the pipe to the pumping station. It was a crude, low building of corrugated iron and raw lumber, chugging away, its gasoline engine polluting the air. It was guarded, but only by 2 men, who were more interested in a game of cards inside the small shed. This was where Ashki's true skill emerged. He was a shadow. He moved Evelyn to a cluster of rocks, told her to wait, and then he was gone. She watched him circle the shed, using the noise of the engine as cover. He moved not like a man, but like a change in the light. He was back 10 minutes later. He did not return empty-handed. He pressed a sheaf of papers into her hand. He had found them in an unlocked file box in the shed. Evelyn sorted through them, her hands trembling with discovery. They were shipping invoices. Invoices for the iron pipe. Invoices for the gasoline engine. And at the bottom, carbon copies of orders, all signed by Silas Crowther, for hundreds of pounds of Excelsior blasting powder. The dates on the dynamite invoices matched. One was 2 days before the Dine Dam was destroyed. The other was the day before Judge Bainbridge's train was attacked. This was it. This was the iron, paper-proof. This was the weapon they would use at the festival. They retreated, moving fast now, heading back toward the canyons that bordered the town. They had a rendezvous to keep. Sister May was waiting where the old mission path met the arroyo. She was not alone. Deputy Tom Willis was with her. They both looked grim. Tom spoke first. He had failed to get the roster. Brody had locked it in a new safe. The key kept on his person. But Sister May had not failed. She held out a small, leather-bound book. It was the parish donation ledger. She spoke in her quiet, clipped New England voice. Father Hale was the one. We knew he was in the tower. Now we know why. She opened the book. She pointed to a series of entries. Large donations, listed as anonymous. From Crowther Mining. The dates corresponded to the first week of every month. Then she produced other papers, bank drafts. She told them Father Hale had a brother back east, a brother with significant gambling debts. These drafts showed payments from Father Hale's personal account to creditors in Santa Fe. payments made 2 days after each of Crowther's donations. The twist was complete. Crowther had not just bought the law, he had bought the church. Father Hale had signaled the riders to attack the train. Tom looked sick. He said this was everything. The pipe, the invoices, the ledgers. They had Crowther. As he spoke, Ashki tensed. He put a hand on Evelyn's arm, silencing her. He had heard it, a single metallic clink, a boot heel on loose stone, high up on the ridge above them. They were not alone. "Ambush!" Ashki's voice was a low command. "Go, now, back to the mission!" 3 shots rang out. Bullets chipped the rock near Evelyn's head. Jago's voice roared from the ridge. "There they are. Get the girl." They ran. Tom and Sister May scrambled down the arroyo, heading for the town. Ashki grabbed Evelyn, pushing her in the opposite direction, toward the maze of canyons. They were the primary targets. 2 of Crowther's men slid down the scree slope, cutting them off. Ashki did not hesitate. He shoved Evelyn toward a narrow cleft in the rock. He drew the bluebird knife. He was buying her time. One of the men, a heavy brute from the railroad camp, charged him. Ashki met him, using the man's own weight against him, throwing him into the second man. Another man appeared on the ledge above them, raising his rifle. Evelyn screamed a warning. The man on the ledge took careful aim. He was focused on Ashki. He did not see that the ledge he was on was loose shale. As he shifted his weight, the rock gave way. He cried out, a short, sharp sound, as he tumbled backward into the canyon, his rifle discharging uselessly into the sky. The distraction was all Ashki needed. He drove his heel into the first man's knee. The man collapsed, and Ashki pulled Evelyn into the cleft. They were in a maze of stone. They ran, ducking through tunnels, climbing over rock falls, until the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Jago's curses grew distant. They had escaped, but they were cut off from Tom and Sister May. They were trapped in the high canyons as night began to fall. Ashki led her to a small, dark opening, a cave he had used before, hidden behind a curtain of ancient, dry scrub. They collapsed inside, the adrenaline draining away, leaving them exhausted and cold. The sun was gone. The desert night, which was as cold as the day was hot, settled in. They sat in the absolute darkness, silence stretching between them. They had the proof, but they were miles from the festival, with an unknown number of men hunting them in the dark. Evelyn spoke first, her voice a raw whisper. She was afraid. Ashki was quiet for a moment. He was checking the bandage on his hand, the one she had applied days ago. It was dirty and worn. He said fear kept a person alive. Only fools and dead men felt nothing. She admitted she had thought she was going to die. On the ledge. He said he would not have let her. The simplicity of the statement hung in the air. He was not boasting. It was a fact. The shared danger, the terror of the fall, the exhilaration of the escape, it all settled on them in the small, dark space. She was scraped and bruised. He was breathing heavily, his body pushed to its limit. She could not see him, but she could feel his presence, a solid warmth in the chilling dark. She felt him move. He was not moving toward her, but shifting, settling against the rock wall. His hand found hers in the darkness. It was not a lover's touch. It was not a gesture of passion. It was the same as his arm around her waist on the ledge. It was an anchor. It was a human connection in the vast, uncaring darkness. He simply took her hand, his palm rough and calloused against hers, his grip firm. She laced her fingers through his. They did not speak again. They sat together in the cold, black silence of the cave, holding on, waiting for the dawn of the most important day of their lives. The harvest festival of Salt Crossing was a lie. It was a performance of hope in a town that had none left. Paper streamers, brittle with dust, hung limp in the dead-hot air between the raw lumber buildings. A fiddler played a tune that was too fast, a frantic, desperate gaiety. The smells of roasting corn and spun sugar were thick, but underneath them was the smell that now defined their lives, alkali dust and the faint, sour odor of sickness. Silas Crowther stood on a platform built in front of the saloon, the master of the lie. He wore his usual dark suit, looking clean and cool, a man untouched by the suffering he had manufactured. He smiled at the crowd, a gathering of gaunt, sun-scoured farmers, suspicious railroad men, and tired women holding listless children. He raised his hands for quiet. The fiddle scraped to a halt. "Friends, neighbors," he boomed, his voice oiled with false sympathy. "It has been a hard season. The drought and the vicious, cowardly acts of our neighbors in the hills," he let the accusation hang. "But today, we celebrate the harvest we have, and to show my commitment to this town, to our future, we will have our annual contest." He pointed to the town well, the one that was now just a pit of brown mud. Then he pointed to a wagon piled high with 20 barrels of water, each stamped Crowther Mining, each guarded by an armed man. A tug of war. The winning team will earn the first draw, a full barrel for each man on the team, a gift from the mine. It was a grotesque parody of community. He was making them compete for the very water he had stolen, forcing them to bless his theft with their participation. Men began to line up, their eyes on the barrels, their pride swallowed by the thirst of their families. In the small crowd, 2 men stood apart. Deputy Tom Willis, now just Tom Willis, wore no badge. His face was a mask of cold resolve. He was not looking at Crowther. He was watching the men in the crowd, catching the eyes of Samuel Abel, the farmer who had lost his land, and 2 others, railroad men who had been cheated of their wages by Crowther's company store. They nodded, imperceptibly. They were ready. Near the steps of the mission, Sister May stood as still as a stone carving. She held the parish ledger in her hands, her knuckles white. She was waiting. Father Hale was on the platform, standing behind Crowther, wiping his sweating face with a handkerchief. The music was about to start again when a gap opened in the crowd. Evelyn Hart and Ashki Inez stepped into the town square. They had not come from the street. They had emerged from the narrow alley between the apothecary and the general store. The town went silent. The fiddler's arm froze. They were a sight of grim purpose, caked in red dust, their clothes torn from the canyons. They looked less like citizens and more like avengers. Evelyn's hair was wild, her face streaked with sweat. She carried her medical bag, holding it not like a doctor, but like a man holding a satchel of explosives. Ashki was at her side, his bandaged hand a stark white against his skin. His eyes were not on the crowd. They were on Crowther, on Jago, on every man with a rifle. Jago, standing near the platform, growled, "It is the girl, the traitor!" He started to move, but Tom Willis stepped in front of him. Tom's voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence. "Let her speak." Evelyn did not wait for permission. She walked past the line of men waiting for the tug of war, past the barrels of stolen water, and stood in the open space before the platform. She did not shout. She spoke, her voice clear and shaking with a cold fury. "There is no drought, neighbors." The crowd murmured. Crowther laughed. A short, ugly sound. "Miss Hart, I believe you are confused and trespassing. There is a bounty on your head." Evelyn ignored him. She looked at the faces in the crowd, at Samuel Abel, at the women she knew. She said Silas Crowther was a liar. She said he did not just fence the springs, he had stolen the water from beneath their feet. She unslung her medical bag and set it on the ground. She took out the first piece of proof, the specimen jar filled with black, oily soil. She held it up. "This is the earth from the high mesa, from a hidden pipe that drains the aquifer, the deep water that feeds all our wells. It is poisoned with machine oil. This is why our children are sick." She took out the map she had drawn. "I have seen this pipe. I have mapped its coordinates. It leads directly to his mine." Crowther's smile tightened. He shouted that these were the ravings of a wanted woman. He told her she was in league with the savages who killed Judge Bainbridge, Evelyn threw the sheaf of invoices at his feet. "And he killed him. He used this." She held up the last invoice. Excelsior blasting powder. Hundreds of pounds. He bought it 2 days before the judge's train was attacked. He bought it the day before the Dine Dam was destroyed. He blew the dam. He murdered a federal judge. He did it all to sell you this. She pointed to the barrels of water. The crowd was a low, angry animal, confused, not knowing which way to turn. Crowther's men, his fake witnesses, began to shout, "She is lying. We saw the Dine. We saw them with torches." It was Sister May who moved next. She walked onto the platform, her ledger held like a Bible. She stood next to the sweating, trembling Father Hale. She spoke, her voice ringing with an authority no one in town had ever defied. "The witnesses lie. The signal to the killers came from this church, from the bell tower." She held the ledger open. "Silas Crowther has been paying Father Hale for his silence, for his complicity. These are the payments. This is the bank draft for his brother's debts." Father Hale collapsed, sobbing, falling to his knees. The confession was absolute. The crowd surged forward. The lie was broken. Jago did not hesitate. He drew his pistol and fired a shot straight into the air. Panic. He roared at his men to control the crowd. The armed guards by the water wagon turned their rifles on the farmers. Another shot. This one was aimed. Jago was trying to kill Tom Willis. Ashkey moved. He was not a man. He was a force. He did not draw a gun. He grabbed a heavy wooden yoke from a nearby ox cart and threw it, spinning, into the knees of 2 of the guards. They went down. He vaulted onto the platform. Jago turned, his pistol coming up. Ashkey was too fast. He grabbed Jago's wrist, forcing the gun up. The shot went wide. He did not kill. He twisted the arm, a sharp, sickening snap of bone. Jago screamed and the pistol clattered to the boards. A third guard, the one who had chased Evelyn, raised his rifle. Ashkey snatched the pistol from Jago's broken grasp. He fired once, not at the man's chest, at his rifle. The bullet struck the wooden stock, splintering it, tearing the weapon from the man's hands. It was an impossible shot, a shot of pure, calculated mercy. Ashkey had kept his vow. In that moment, as the town stood frozen between the proof and the violence, the earth gave its own judgment. A low, deep rumble came from beneath their feet. The ground trembled. In the middle of the street, 50 feet from the platform, the packed dirt erupted. A geyser of black, oily water shot 20 feet into the air. The illegal pipeline, badly built, stressed by the distant dynamite blasts and the immense pressure of the aquifer, had burst. The water did not just flow. It exploded. It tore the street apart, creating a muddy, surging river in seconds. It hit the water wagon, toppling the barrels, which were swept away like corks. It slammed into the festival stalls, washing away the paper streamers, the roasting corn, the pathetic symbols of their false hope. The crowd's anger turned to raw panic. They scrambled for high ground, for the boardwalks. As the flash flood filled the town square, Evelyn saw it all in a heartbeat. The truth, the violence, the water. She saw Mrs. Abel, Samuel's wife, fall, her child torn from her arms by the current. Evelyn's panic vanished, replaced by the cold, clear focus of her training. She grabbed Tom. "Get the women and children to the apothecary. It is the highest ground." She set up a triage station on her father's boardwalk, which was 2 feet above the rising mud. She directed men to build a makeshift barrier from wagon beds. Her voice was calm, absolute. It was the voice of a doctor. Ashkey was already moving. He saw the flood not as a disaster, but as a battlefield. He organized the men Tom had gathered. He and Samuel Abel formed a human chain, wading into the chest deep, swirling water to retrieve the child Evelyn had seen. He pulled 2 old men from the current, throwing them onto the boardwalk. He and Evelyn, in the center of the chaos, had become the town's new center of gravity. They were not talking. They were acting. They were saving the townspeople, who had been ready to hunt Evelyn for a bounty, now obeyed her every command. They saw the truth, not in her words, but in her actions. Silas Crowther watched from the platform. He was soaked. His face was a mask of pure, demonic rage. Everything was gone. His plan, his power, his mine. The flood was his own evidence, bursting from the ground to condemn him. He was ruined. He looked at Evelyn. She was on her knees, wrapping a bandage around a child's head. She was his last piece of leverage. He moved quietly, his pistol, a small derringer, hidden in his hand. He stalked her through the screaming, chaotic crowd. Ashki saw him. He was 50 feet away, on the other side of the flood, dragging a man to safety. He roared her name. Evelyn. She looked up, confused. Crowther was on her. He grabbed her from behind, hauling her to her feet. He pressed the small, cold barrel of the derringer to her temple. The crowd noise faded for her, replaced by the pounding of her heart and Crowther's voice, a snarl in her ear. He told her to scream. He told her to stop. He told her to be quiet. He dragged her backward, using her as a human shield. Jago, his arm broken, but his eyes still full of hate, followed, picking up a fallen rifle. Ashki started to move, but the floodwater was a raging river between them. Crowther and Jago backed their way to a pair of horses tied at the far end of the street, the only ones not swept away. Crowther threw Evelyn onto one, her hands tied with a speed that spoke of long practice. He mounted behind her, his arm locked around her, the gun still at her head. Ashki could only watch, helpless, his hands bloody from the rescue. As Crowther wheeled the horse around, heading north toward the mine, Evelyn met Ashki's eyes. Her face was pale with terror, but her hand moved. It was the lesson he had taught her. She let the small, carved bluebird knife, the dolly, drop from her belt. It fell into the churning, muddy water at the horse's feet. A sign, a trail, a promise. Crowther and Jago disappeared, their horses splashing through the wreckage of the town. Ashki plunged his arm into the brown water, his fingers searching the mud. He found it. He gripped the smooth, wooden handle of the knife. The flood was already beginning to recede, leaving behind a street of devastation, mud, and stunned, silent, finally comprehending people. Ashki Nez stood, the muddy knife in his fist. Tom Willis and Samuel Abel joined him. They looked north, toward the black smoke of the mine on the high mesa. The fight was not over. It had just begun. The water receded almost as quickly as it had come, leaving the main street of Salt Crossing a canyon of stinking, oily mud. It had exposed the town's wound. The lie was visible to all. Ashki Nez stood, the muddy dolly knife clutched in his hand. Tom Willis, his face a mask of fury, was beside him. Two dying men, their faces grim, had appeared from the chaos. They were Tiana's husband and brother, drawn by the distant gunfire, arriving just in time to see the kidnapping. "We go," Ashki said. The word was flat, final. Tom nodded, pulling his pistol from the mud and cleaning the action. "They are heading north, to the mine." Ashki's mind was a cold, clear space, the oath he had sworn, the one to his ancestors, the vow of Hozo, of balance, of creating no more ghosts, was a distant bell. Another sound was louder, Evelyn's cry. He looked at the knife, the bluebird that finds its way home. They took horses from the livery, their movements economical, wasting no time. The four of them rode north, leaving the stunned, muddy town behind. They did not take the main wagon road. Ashki led them into the high canyons, the land he knew, the paths that were not on any white man's map. He led them toward the narrow, winding gorge the Dine called Dilkaya, Blood Canyon. It was a place of old ambushes and bad memories, a shortcut that was steep and dangerous, but it would cut 2 hours off their ride. As he rode, the internal conflict tore at him. He had given his word. He would not kill. He would use the white man's law against them. He had saved Jago. He had disarmed the guard. He had held to his promise. And for his promise, Crowther had taken Evelyn. The memory of her hand in his, in the absolute darkness of the cave, returned to him. The trust. He had failed to protect it. He remembered his cousin, dying of the lung sickness at Wheeldie, his hand just as small, just as cold. His grip tightened on the reins. When he faced Crowther, would the law be enough? Would sparing such a man be justice? Or would it be the final failure? The canyon walls rose around them, red as a fresh wound, and offered no answer. Silas Crowther shoved Evelyn through the door of a storage shed at the mine. The journey had been a blur of terror, the horse scrambling up the steep switchbacks, Crowther's arm like an iron bar across her chest, the derringer cold against her scalp. The mine was in chaos. The explosion of the pipeline in town had been the final signal. Crowther was not just escaping. He was destroying. Men were running, loading wagons, carrying boxes. He threw her onto a dusty cot. Jago was there, his broken arm in a crude sling, his face pale and sweating with pain. He was piling crates of dynamite near the main entrance of the mine shaft. Crowther was no longer the calm, collected man from the saloon. His suit was soaked in mud, his hair wild. His eyes were wide, unhinged. He had lost the aquifer, the mine, the town, all of it, gone in an instant of his own arrogance. He turned on Evelyn, his voice a low snarl. "This is your doing, girl. You and your savage. You wanted to ruin me. Now you get to watch the end." "Jago," he shouted. "Set the charges. All of them. The main pump, the scaffolding, the entire shaft. We are erasing the board." He grabbed a coil of rough rope and tied Evelyn's hands to the wooden frame of the cot. He tied them with a brutal, punishing tightness. Crowther grabbed her medical bag, which Jago had brought up on his horse, and threw it into the corner. He told Jago to watch her. He was going to the main office to get the strongbox. Evelyn was left with Jago. The man was clumsy with his one good hand, fumbling with the fuses and caps. He was muttering to himself, his eyes darting to the door, terrified of being left behind. Evelyn tested the ropes. They were too tight, cutting into her wrists, her fingers already tingling. Panic rose in her throat, hot and sharp. She fought it down. She was Dr. Hart's daughter. She was a woman of science. She would not panic. She looked at her bag in the corner. It was 10 feet away. She began to speak, her voice trembling just enough. "Please, mister, the ropes. They are stopping my blood. Just a little looser." Jago glared at her. He told her to shut up. She tried again. "The dust! I cannot breathe! Please, water!" Jago ignored her, his attention on a stubborn fuse. She had to get to the bag. She began to rock, a small, subtle movement, back and forth, on the cot. The old wooden legs scraped on the floor. "What are you doing?" Jago snarled. "It is a bug," she cried, a false hysteria in her voice. "A spider, on my legs." She thrashed, a believable performance of feminine fear. The cot scraped, moved, scraped again. She was 2 feet closer to the bag. Jago cursed her, telling her to be still, and went back to his work. She rocked again, scraped, rocked, scraped. Her wrists were raw, but she was close. She twisted, her fingers stretching, and grabbed the leather strap of the bag. She pulled it to the cot. Jago was still muttering over the dynamite. She fumbled with the clasp, her tied hands clumsy. She got it open. Her medicines, her tools. She found what she needed: a small tin of horse liniment, a thick grease, and a small, folded paper of cayenne pepper, which she used for warming poultices. She worked, her movements hidden by the cot's blanket. She smeared the thick, oily grease over her wrists, over the ropes. It was slippery, foul-smelling. She twisted, pulling against the knots, the rope sliding, the grease burning in the cuts on her skin. One hand came free. She held her breath. shoving the loosened rope under the blanket. Jago was still working, his back to her. She quickly untied the other hand. She did not run. She stayed on the cot, her hands hidden, her heart hammering. She poured the bright red cayenne powder into a small, dry bandage. She folded it. A small packet of pure fire. She waited. Ashki, Tom, and the 2 Dine men left their horses in a canyon a mile from the mine. They moved on foot, scaling the last ridge. The mine was active, but it was the activity of an evacuation. Ashki stopped. He held up a hand. He pointed. A small, white scrap was tied to a piece of rusted machinery. A clean strip of bandage. Evelyn. It was her trail. She was free. He felt a surge of cold, sharp pride. She was not a victim. She was a partner. They followed the trail. Another strip of bandage tied to a water barrel. She was leading them away from the main activity, toward the network of storage sheds. They heard a sound, a man, weeping, a low, desperate, sobbing prayer. Tom Willis drew his pistol. Ashki put a hand on his arm. They rounded the corner of a shed. Father Hale was huddled on the ground, his face in his hands, shaking. He had clearly been abandoned, left behind by Crowther. Ashki stepped into the open. Father Hale looked up, his eyes wide with terror. He saw Ashki, then Tom, and he let out a thin wail. "I did not know," he stammered, crawling backward. "He said he had gambling debts. His brother—" Crowther promised to help, just to send a signal. He did not know they would kill anyone. He swore it. Tom Willis's face was dark. He raised his pistol. He said this man let a federal judge die. Ashki stepped in front of the pistol. He looked down at the sniveling priest. His own rage was a living thing, demanding blood. This man's weakness had cost lives. He reached down and hauled Father Hale to his feet. He looked at Tom. He said this was not a ghost. This was proof. He was the man who would talk to the new judge. He was the key to Crowther's conviction. Ashki pushed Hale against the wall. He took the rope the priest had been clutching and, with a few quick, efficient knots, tied him securely to a support beam. He told Hale to pray. The law was coming. They heard a shout from the main mine. "Jago!" They ran toward the sound. The main chamber of the mine was a vast cavern, dug deep into the mountain. It was lit by swaying lanterns. A massive wooden scaffolding system climbed the walls, reaching a processing ledge hundreds of feet up. And everywhere, the glint of copper wires, the wax paper cylinders of dynamite, fuses were sputtering, their smoke filling the air. Jago was on the ground floor, near a massive pile of dynamite boxes. The main magazine. High above, on the scaffolding, Evelyn was running. Crowther was behind her. He had seen her escape and was chasing her up the structure. "She is here," Ashki shouted. Crowther caught her on a narrow plank. He grabbed her, pulling her close. The derringer once again at her head. He saw Ashki and Tom below. He screamed, his voice echoing in the cavern. "That is far enough. All of you, one more step and I send us all to hell." "Jago, light it!" Crowther roared. Ashki saw it all. Evelyn, trapped. Crowther, desperate. The sputtering fuses. And something else, in a side tunnel, blocked by a heavy iron gate. A dozen men were huddled. Their faces were pale, starved. The coerced mine workers. They were prisoners, left to die in the explosion. Tom saw them. He yelled, "Ashki, the girl! We have the men!" Tom and the 2 Dine men ran to the gate. They used a discarded pickaxe, slamming it against the heavy lock. Ashki started to climb. He moved up the scaffolding with the speed of a squirrel, his eyes locked on Evelyn. He was choosing. He was choosing her. Jago, seeing the prisoners being freed, panicked. He was cut off from his boss. He looked at the main fuse, the one that led to the entire dynamite magazine. He made his own choice. He lit it. He screamed, "It is all over, boss," and ran for the exit. The fuse was burning fast, a river of sparks. Crowther saw it. He was trapped. He looked at Ashki climbing toward him. He looked at Evelyn. In a final act of spite, he shoved her, hard, away from him, toward the edge of the weak scaffolding. He shouted that if he died, they all died. He turned and ran, disappearing into a dark side tunnel, an old shaft that was his private escape route. The scaffold under Evelyn's feet cracked. She screamed as the plank gave way. Ashki was there. He leaped across a 10-foot gap, catching her arm, pulling her back from the brink just as the wood splintered and fell into the darkness. Below, Tom had the gate open. The prisoners, dazed and terrified, were stumbling out. Tom shouted, "This way! The north tunnel! It is the only way out!" Ashki pulled Evelyn along. They scrambled down the scaffolding, joining the stream of running men. The first explosion hit. It was not the main charge. It was the charges Jago had set along the walls. The scaffolding tore apart in a shower of fire and splintered wood. Jago, not fast enough, was caught in his own blast. Ashki, Evelyn, Tom, and the rescued miners ran into the blackness of the north tunnel. The air was thick with dust. They could feel the mountains shuddering around them. They ran for their lives, bursting out of the tunnel mouth, expecting the clean night air. Instead, they were met by a solid wall of flame. The north exit was burning. Crowther, in his desperate flight through the side tunnels, had triggered a secondary charge or knocked over a fuel depot. The main explosion went off behind them. The mountain seemed to lift, and the tunnel they had just exited collapsed inward. A roar of 1,000,000 tons of falling rock. They were alive. They were out of the mine, but they were trapped on a narrow ledge, the mountain collapsing behind them, and a curtain of fire in front. The way out was gone. The world was reduced to fire and falling stone. The main shaft of the mine, the one they had just exited, collapsed behind them with a final, deafening roar, a sound of the mountain tearing itself apart. The blast of hot air and dust threw them to the ground. They were trapped on a narrow ledge, perhaps 30 yards long. Behind them, a solid wall of newly fallen rock, still groaning and settling. In front of them, a curtain of fire. The burning north exit was an inferno, feeding on the dry support timbers and, Evelyn realized with horror, pools of spilled gasoline. The rescued miners, a dozen skeletal men, cried out, huddling against the rock face, their faces masks of terror. They had been saved from the explosion only to be burned alive. Tom Willis, his face black with soot, yelled over the roar of the flames, "We are boxed in! There is no way down!" Ashki Nez was already moving. His eyes scanned the chasm. The fire was in front, but the chasm itself, the great pit of the open mine, was to their left, through the thick, oily smoke. He saw it. It was their only chance, an old, wooden suspension bridge, a catwalk for ore carts, spanned the chasm about 40 feet away. It crossed the pit at its narrowest point, leading to a different section of the mine complex, one that seemed untouched by the fire. It was rickety, ancient, and swaying in the hot updrafts. He pointed. "There, that is the way." He grabbed the 2 dying men. He told them to get the miners moving. He told Tom to take the rear. But as they moved toward the bridge, a figure emerged from a side tunnel near the far anchor of the catwalk. Silas Crowther. He was not running. He stood there, his fine suit in tatters, his face a demonic mask of soot and rage. He had escaped through his private tunnel only to find his exit blocked by the very people he had tried to kill. He held his small derringer, and in his other hand, a burning torch. He was standing directly in their path, blocking the bridge. He screamed, his voice cracking, "It is over." Evelyn, her mind racing, saw something else. Near the anchor point of the bridge, on their side, was another small stack of dynamite. This stack was different. It was wired not to the mine, but to the rock wall itself, right where the deep aquifer, now exposed by the earlier pipe burst, was pouring clean water into the chasm. A single fuse sputtered beside it. It was not a barrier. It was a final act of spite. He was trying to poison the water source itself, to bury the aquifer in tons of toxic rock. She yelled to Ashki, "The dynamite! He is trying to poison the well!" Crowther laughed. "A high, thin sound of madness. If I cannot have this valley, no one will." He raised his pistol toward the miners. Tom yelled at Ashki, "Get him! We will get the men across!" The rescued miners, seeing their captor, hesitated, their fear of Crowther almost as great as their fear of the fire. Ashki did not hesitate. He moved past the miners, onto the narrow ledge leading to the bridge. Crowther saw him coming and backed onto the swaying catwalk. He stood in the middle, the chasm falling into fiery darkness below him. He shouted his taunts, his voice echoing against the rock. "Come on, savage. This land was not meant for your kind. It was meant for men who are strong enough to take it. Men like me, you are weak. Your people are weak. That is why you are disappearing." The words were meant to break him, to turn his resolve into the blind rage of a killer. The rage of Ashki was a cold, pure thing. He heard the words. He heard the echo of the soldiers at Wieldy. He saw the face of his cousin, dying in the poisoned earth. He saw Evelyn, the gun at her head. He walked onto the bridge. It swayed violently under his weight. While the two men faced each other, Evelyn scrambled toward the sputtering fuse. Tom yelled for her, but she ignored him. She was the only one who understood. She had to stop it. The fuse was short, burning fast. She could not put it out. She had to break the connection. She saw the thin copper wires running from the fuse to the waxy, paper-wrapped sticks, the detonator cap. She grabbed the wire, her hands raw and bloody. On the bridge, the two men met. Crowther fired his derringer. Ashki twisted, the bullet searing the air past his head. He did not slow. He closed the distance in 2 steps. Crowther swung the torch, a spray of embers. Ashki ducked under it, driving his shoulder into the larger man's chest. They collided. The bridge swung, a pendulum over the inferno. Crowther was bigger, his weight fueled by desperation. He grabbed Ashki, trying to throw them both over the side. Ashki used his speed. He was not fighting to kill. He was fighting to subdue. He struck Crowther in the throat, the same move he had used on the guard in the canyon. Crowther gagged, his grip loosening. Ashki twisted, using the momentum, and slammed Crowther against the thick rope railing. The rope, old and dry, snapped. The entire bridge shuddered. The planking beneath their feet gave way. Evelyn saw it happen. She screamed. She yanked the detonator cap free from the dynamite stick, a split second before the fuse sparked and died at her fingertips. The water was safe. The bridge did not fall completely. One side gave way. Crowther, his balance gone, fell into the void. But he did not disappear. His leg caught in the broken planking, and a trailing guide rope wrapped around his arm. He was dangling, his body swinging free, suspended over the chasm. He looked up, his face white with terror. His leg was broken, twisted at an unnatural angle. He was helpless. Ashki was on the remaining, stable part of the ledge. He looked down at the man who had tried to murder him, who had poisoned his people, who had killed the judge, who had kidnapped the woman. He looked down at Silas Crowther. "Help me," Crowther whimpered. "Please, for the love of God." Ashki stood, breathing hard, the smoke and ash stinging his eyes. The taunts echoed in his head. The strong survive. This was the moment, the final test. He could let go. He could walk away. It would be justice. The mountain itself had passed sentence. He looked back. Evelyn was safe, clutching the dead detonator. Tom and the Dine men were ushering the last of the miners onto the far side of the chasm, using the half-broken bridge, which was still anchored on the other end. He looked at the miners, the witnesses. He looked at Evelyn. He remembered his vow. Hozo, balance, a life for a life. He would not make another ghost. He knelt. He reached down his hand, the one Evelyn had bandaged. He told Crowther that God had no part in this, but the law did. He grabbed the front of Crowther's ruined suit jacket. With a strength born of pure, cold resolve, he began to haul the heavy man up. Tom Willis, seeing what was happening, ran back across the precarious bridge to help. Together, they pulled the whimpering, broken Silas Crowther onto the solid ledge. Ashki did not give him a moment. He used the rope from the bridge and, with the same efficient knots he had used on Father Hale, bound Crowther's hands. It was finished. The sound of many voices reached them, carried on the wind. Emerging from the main mine road, the one they had not taken, was a crowd. Sister May was in the lead, holding a lantern, her face set. Beside her was Samuel Abel, the farmer, carrying a rifle, and behind them, 30 or 40 of the townspeople, the ones who had been left in the muddy, ruined street. They had seen the explosions, seen the fire, and followed Sister May, who had insisted on bearing witness. They arrived on the ledge, their faces illuminated by the dying fires. They saw it all. They saw the dozen starved, terrified miners, living proof of Crowther's slavery. They saw the bound and weeping Father Hale, proof of the conspiracy. And they saw Silas Crowther, broken and tied, defeated not by an act of vengeance, but by an act of mercy. Ashki stood. Evelyn went to his side. A small, oilskin-wrapped book had fallen from the pocket of Crowther during the rescue. Evelyn picked it up from the dust. It was not the church ledger. It was smaller, denser. She opened it. It was a cipher. Names, dates, and numbers. She did not recognize all the names, but she saw two that made her blood run cold. A territorial senator and a director of the railroad. This was not about one mine. This was about the entire territory. This was the proof that would bring the federal marshals. A low rumble filled the air. It was not the mountain. A drop of water hit Evelyn's soot-covered hand. Then another. Rain. A sudden, unseasonal, impossible downpour began. It fell in heavy sheets, striking the burning timbers with a deafening hiss. Steam rose in great white clouds, choking the fire, dousing the flames. The air, which had been thick with ash, suddenly smelled of clean water and wet creosote. It was as if the sky had opened, the mountain itself sighing, breathing out, its fever broken. The crowd stood in the sudden, cleansing rain, silent. Tom Willis, his authority absolute, stepped forward. He did not have his badge, but he did not need it. He put his hand on the bound shoulder of Silas Crowther. He said, "Silas Crowther, you are under arrest for the murder of Judge Cyrus Bainbridge, for theft and for kidnapping." He looked at Ashki and then at Evelyn, a profound, weary respect in his eyes. He said it was time to go home. He gestured to the bound prisoners and the rescued miners, and the procession began the long, slow walk back down the mountain, leaving the dead. Dark mine to the rain. The long walk down from the mountain was a procession of ghosts. The rain, a baptism and a burial, washed the soot from their faces, turning the dust of the mine into brown rivers that ran down their clothes. They were silent, the 40 of them, a strange, new community born in fire and terror. Tom Willis, his authority needing no badge, walked first, his pistol holstered. Behind him, bound and stumbling, were Silas Crowther and Father Hale. Crowther was silent, his broken body a testament to his fall, his eyes empty. Father Hale wept quietly, his prayers a wet mumble. Ashki, Nez, and the 2 dying men walked beside the rescued miners, a protective flank. The miners were dazed, their eyes wide, squinting at the open, gray sky as if it were a miracle. Evelyn Hart walked near the back, beside Sister May. She carried her medical bag in one hand, and in the other, she held the small, oilskin ledger. When they reached Salt Crossing, the town was unrecognizable. The main street was a wide, deep scar of mud and wreckage. The flood had torn the fronts from 2 buildings. The paper streamers from the festival were plastered like wet leaves against the walls. The townspeople who had stayed behind emerged from their homes, their faces pale. They saw the procession, they saw the starved miners, they saw the bound priest, they saw Crowther, his arrogance shattered, and they saw Evelyn Hart and Ashke Nez walking together, covered in the same grime, carrying the same exhaustion. The suspicion that had defined Salt Crossing was gone. The lies were gone. All that was left was the mud and the truth. Evelyn found her father, Dr. Hart, standing on the porch of the apothecary, his thin frame shaking. He looked at his daughter, at her torn dress, her bloody hands, and he simply opened his arms. She stepped into them, her body finally letting go, shaking with a week of held-back fear. Tom Willis did not rest. He put Crowther and Hale in the town's small, sturdy jail cells. He posted Samuel Abel, his rifle steady, as a guard. Then he walked to the telegraph office. He did not send the wire to the territorial senator, whose name was in Crowther's ledger. He sent it to the federal barracks at Fort Wingate, 200 miles away. He sent a simple message: federal judge murdered, conspiracy confirmed, multiple witnesses. He mentioned the ledger. He asked for a new judge. He asked for United States Marshals. The wait was 10 days. 10 days where the town existed in a state of strange, quiet suspension. The rain had passed, but the air was different. The riverbed was no longer bone dry. The rain and the burst aquifer had created a small, clean trickle. The sound of water had returned to Salt Crossing. The town began the work of rebuilding, but it was a different kind of work. Sister May, her moral authority absolute, opened the doors of the damaged mission. She did not ring the bell for Mass. She started a fire in the parish kitchen. With food donated from the general store, she began to make stew. Tiana, the dying woman whose child Evelyn had saved, was the first to arrive, carrying a bag of blue cornmeal. Samuel Abel's wife came next, with potatoes. The church was no longer a place of silent, guilty secrets. It was a kitchen. It was a place of work. The law arrived on a Tuesday, carried not by one man, but by 6. A new federal circuit judge, a man named Harlan, with eyes like cold iron. He was flanked by 4 United States Marshals, their coats long, their faces hard. They were not men who could be bought with mind shares or intimidated by local politics. The trial was held in the open air, in the ruined town square. The entire population of Salt Crossing and the elders from the dying village, including grandmother Nabahi, stood as witnesses. It was not a trial of opinion. It was a trial of facts. The oilskin ledger was presented. The names of the senator and the railroad director were read aloud, silencing the new judge for a full minute. The rescued miners, their bodies still thin but their voices strong, testified to their imprisonment. Father Hale, his face gray, gave his full confession. He detailed the payments, the gambling debts, the signal from the tower. Sister May presented the church ledgers, confirming his story. Tom Willis, his voice clear, detailed the corruption of Marshal Brody, the setup, the fake evidence. Evelyn Hart took the stand. She told them everything: the chemical smell in the warehouse, the chase in the arroyo, the map of the pipeline, the oily soil, the dynamite invoices, the final confrontation. When she finished, the square was silent. Ashki Nez was the last to speak. He stood before the judge, not as a victim, but as a man of his own nation. He spoke in English, his words precise. He described the tracks of the ambushers. He described the mercy he had shown the guards. He described Crowther's final act of spite, the attempt to poison the aquifer. The judge looked at Silas Crowther, who sat in a chair, his legs splinted, his face a mask of defeated hatred. The verdict was immediate. Silas Crowther was found guilty of the murder of Judge Cyrus Bainbridge, of conspiracy to defraud the United States government, of kidnapping, and of sabotage. He was sentenced to life in a federal prison. He was taken away in irons by the marshals, and the shadow he had cast over the valley was finally, truly gone. Father Hale, in light of his full confession, was given a lesser sentence, to be served in a federal facility. The next day, the real work began, the water. Marshal Tom Willis, his promotion to the town's chief lawman now official, called the first meeting. It was not held in his office. It was held by the new, small stream in the riverbed. Grandmother Nabahi and Ashki sat on one side. Tom, Evelyn, and Samuel Abel sat on the other. The old laws were dead. Tom Willis said they needed new ones. Grandmother Nabahi spoke, her voice quiet. Ashki translated. She said the water was not a thing to be owned. It was a thing to be shared. The pipe had wounded the mountain, but the mountain had healed itself. Now they must heal their two communities. They agreed. The illegal pipeline would be dismantled. Its iron used to rebuild the town. The Dine Dam, the original one, would be repaired. But it would be repaired by men from both the town and the village. A new water committee was formed. 3 Dine, 3 townsfolk. They would measure the flow. They would ensure the farms got their share, and the village got theirs. The ancient rights of the Dine, their claim to the water that had always been theirs, was recognized in the new town charter. Evelyn found her new purpose. The sickness from the bad water still lingered. Her father, his health frail, could not manage the apothecary alone. Evelyn moved the work outside. She set up a large canvas tent between the town and the Dine village, a field dispensary. She treated everyone, the settlers' children, the Dine elders. She used her quinine and her bandages, but she also learned. Tiana showed her the juniper salve for burns. She learned to use willow bark for fevers when the laudanum ran low. She began to teach. Tiana and 2 other young Dine women came to her tent every day. They were quick, their hands steady. Evelyn taught them how to sterilize instruments, how to measure doses, how to set a simple fracture. It was not a charity, it was an exchange. She and Ashki did not speak of the mountain. They did not speak of the cave. They were too busy. They worked, side by side, rebuilding the dam, hauling debris from the street. They worked with the easy comfort of 2 people who had seen the worst of each other, and the best. One evening, as the sun was setting, turning the red rocks to fire, she was cleaning her tent. Ashki approached. He was holding the dolly knife, the one she had dropped in the mud. He held it out to her. She took it. It was clean. The wood was polished. And she saw, on the handle, a new carving. Next to the tiny bluebird, he had carved a series of fine, flowing lines, the lines of a river, the mark of the water she had saved. He said it was hers. It had found its home. She looked at him. The silence that had once been a barrier between them was now a comfort. She finally asked him, her voice low, "Will you stay, now that the water is back?" He watched the sunset for a moment. He said his people were rebuilding. The debt he owed was to them, and to the land. He asked her, "Will you stay? Your father is well. The town is safe. You could go east." Evelyn thought of the east. She thought of clean cities, of music, of a life without dust. It felt like a photograph of someone else's life. She said her work was here. Her medicines were needed. He nodded. He said then they would both stay. They would stay, and they would do the work, slowly, together. That night, the town held its first true gathering. It was not a festival. It was a fire. A large, communal fire was built in the center of the clean riverbed. Everyone was there. Marshal Tom and his new wife, Sister May, serving coffee. Samuel Abel, his farm now his own again. Grandmother Nabahi, Tiana, and their families, the former miners, now working for wages, rebuilding the town. They sat together, the two communities, no longer separated by fear. Grandmother Nabahi stood. She told a story in the soft, flowing sounds of her language. Tiana translated. It was the story of the first people, and how the holy people taught them to find water in the desert, and to honor it. When she was finished, Samuel Abel, a man of few words, stood. He told a simple story about his grandfather in Tennessee, who had taught him that you only take from the land what you are willing to give back. The stories, one from a deep, ancient past, one from a simple, new one, wove together in the firelight. They were speaking two languages, but for the first time, they were telling the same story. A story of healing, a story of respect, a story of a long, slow future, beginning at last. The year was 1871. The decade of the 1870s was settling into a new shape. The drought that had defined the Arizona Territory, that long, cruel, punishing season, had broken. The great flood that had torn through Salt Crossing, the wound of the burst aquifer, had been followed by a long, deep, healing rain. The Salt River was a river once more. It was not the wide, powerful artery it had been in the stories of the old ones, but it was alive. It ran clear and steady over the clean-washed stones. The banks, once a cracked white scar of alkali, were now dark with damp earth. Dawn in Salt Crossing was no longer an arrival of heat and dust. It was an arrival of light. The air smelled of wet creosote and the sharp, clean scent of juniper. In the shallow pools of the new river, children were playing. Their voices, high and clear, echoed against the red rocks. They were the children of the town, farmers' sons and daughters, and they were the children of the din, their dark hair shining in the morning sun. Their laughter was a single, blended sound. From the mission, smoke rose. It was not the signal fire of a terrified, guilty priest. It was the smoke of the bakery oven. Sister May, her face no longer stern but settled into a look of profound, busy peace, had found her true calling. She and Tiana, the mother whose child Evelyn had saved, ran the kitchen as a community trust. The smell of hot cornbread and fresh coffee drifted over the town. Far up the canyon, from the village of the Dine, the faint, steady beat of a drum could be heard. It was not a sound of war. It was the sound of weaving, of rebuilding, of life returning to its proper rhythms. In the town, the mission bell, the one Father Hale had used to signal the death of a judge, rang out. It was no longer a call to confession. Marshal Tom Willis rang it every morning at 7. It was the bell that called the men to work. The drum and the bell, the two hearts of the valley, did not fight. They found their harmony in the cool morning air. The town was healing. The scars were still there. The main street was a wide ribbon of dark, packed earth, not yet rebuilt. The wreckage of the saloon had been cleared away, but the apothecary, the general store, and the mission stood firm. The work of justice had been slow, but it had been absolute. The oilskin ledger that Evelyn had found, the book of bribes, had brought the full weight of the federal government down on the territory. The senator whose name was in its pages was facing indictment. The railroad director had been removed. The web of corruption Crowther had woven was completely undone. The subplots of the valley had found their resolution. Marshal Tom Willis stood on the new boardwalk in front of his office, watching the children play. He was a new man, his youthful doubt replaced by a quiet, earned authority. He had married Sarah Abel, the daughter of the farmer Samuel Abel, whose land had been saved. They were expecting their first child. The town was peaceful, not with the silence of fear, but with the quiet of shared purpose. The men who had been rescued from the mine were no longer ghosts. They were the town's strongest laborers, paid a fair wage by the new town council. They were rebuilding the general store, their loyalty to Tom Willis, and to the town that had saved them, absolute. Grandmother Navajo was, as she had always been, the moral center of the valley. The water committee, composed of 3 townsfolk and 3 dine, met every Tuesday. Her voice, translated by Ashki, was the one that held the most weight. She spoke of balance, and the people listened. In the new, small building that served as the town hall, a single smooth piece of pine wood was posted on the wall. At the top, in clear black letters, it read, "Common Water Rules." The rules were simple, written in English, below the English. Tiana and Evelyn had worked for weeks to create a written, phonetic version of the rules in the Dine language. At the bottom were the signatures: Tom Willis, Samuel Abel, Sister May, and the spiral mark of Grandmother Nabahi, beside the strong, clear signature of Ashki Nez. Hanging on a small, wooden peg beside the sign was a single object: the dolly knife, the small tool with the carved bluebird, and the newly carved lines of a river. It was the town's conscience, the proof that law and justice were not the same thing, but they could, with great effort, be made to serve one another. Evelyn Hart and Ashki Nez were not in the town. They had left at sunrise. They had ridden his horses, taking the high trail into the canyons, the path that led to the scarred, dark mesa. They climbed the last section on foot, the way they had done in fear, but now they moved with an easy, shared confidence. They stood on Windshelf. The place, the moment that had changed everything, the place where she had almost fallen, the place where he had caught her. It was no longer a place of terror. The wind that had nearly torn her from the cliff was gone. Today, there was only a breeze, a gentle, steady breath that moved across the high rocks. The signs of the fire were still there, the black scorch marks on the stone, but where the earth had been bare, where the oily sediment had poisoned the ground, new life was pushing through. Small, bright green tufts of grass, born of the rain and the new season, grew between the stones. The mountain was healing. They stood for a long time in silence, looking down at the valley. The town of Salt Crossing was a small, neat collection of blocks in the distance. The river was a thread of pure silver, shining in the new light. They were comfortable in the silence. The weeks of rebuilding, of working side by side to repair the dam, of hauling stone and cleaning debris, had forged a bond deeper than any words of passion. They had talked, in the long evenings, sitting by the communal fire. They had finally spoken of the future. They had been honest about their fears. He was a man of the Dane, his life tied to the rocks and the spirits of the high canyons. She was a woman of science, her mind full of chemicals and procedures, her heritage rooted in the orderly cities of the East. They had made a promise. It was not a promise of forever, not a desperate vow made in the shadow of death. It was a promise to go slow, to be steady, slow and steady. They would build this new, strange life one day at a time. They would build their trust, not on the memory of the fire, but on the daily work of their hands. Evelyn knelt, touching one of the new, green blades of grass. She said aloud that it was healing. Ashki looked out at the vast, clear sky. He said the mountain had healed itself. She admitted, her voice low, that she was still afraid. Sometimes, afraid that the greed, the thirst, the old ways would return. He did not lie. He did not offer her false comfort. He said it might, but this time, they would be ready for it. They would be ready together. He had kept his vow. He had not taken a life. He had not become a ghost, and he had not made one. He had faced the final choice and chosen life, chosen mercy, and in doing so, had saved his entire valley. He was at peace. Evelyn, too, had found her freedom. It was not the freedom she had dreamed of, the one that meant running away. It was the freedom that came from staying, the freedom of planting her feet in the red dust, of facing the fire, and of choosing to remain, of choosing to do the right thing. The wind picked up, just a little. It was a soft, playful gust that circled the shelf. It tugged at her hair, which she now wore tied back with a simple leather thong, much like his. She turned her face into the breeze, and a slow, quiet smile touched her lips. He was watching her. The severity that had been his mask for so long was gone. His eyes, dark and deep, were full of a quiet warmth. He smiled back, a small, rare expression that reached his eyes. He spoke, his voice soft, just loud enough for her. He said it seemed fate still had a sense of humor. The old joke, their secret, the words that had broken the terror on this very ledge. Evelyn laughed. It was not the choked, terrified sound of that day. It was a real laugh, clear and full, echoing in the quiet air of the mesa. He moved, stepping close, standing beside her. He did not pull her into a desperate embrace. He did not kiss her. The promise was to go slow. He simply slid his arm around her back, his hand resting warm and firm on her waist. It was a gesture of quiet possession, of profound, steady comfort. An anchor. They stood together on Windshelf, in the silence after the wind, watching the sun rise over their healing valley. Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West Tales. Please comment below and let us all know where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and press that hype button to support us and help this story reach more people.